Hello, everyone. It's Shane Conto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to the Wasteland Vintage Roadshow, which is now on the SPM Crew Podcasting Network. And this is my monthly podcast where, this is just my excuse to talk about some of my favorite films. And for this month, I'm going to be talking about 1975's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest from director Milos Forman and based off of the Ken Kesey novel starring Jack Nicholson. And joining me for this month is one of my best friends and member of the movie club, Matt Williams. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Shane. As always, love being on talking about film.
Absolutely. And this will be an interesting one, as this is a Best Picture winner and also a film that deals with mental illness in a very serious way. And just a little bit of perspective, I definitely don't have a background in that, as I have a master's in accounting and work at a college. But Matt, what's your background?
Yeah, so I'm a master's in clinical mental health counseling, and I never worked in inpatient um, programming, which is what like a psych hospital is. There's this thing called levels of care. Most people think either inpatient, where you're in a hospital for a certain amount of time, usually it's shorter periods of time, honestly, and then or people think about this regular talk therapy, I guess just like once a week or something like that. There are other levels. So I primarily do the once a week thing, and in the past I've done kind of like a hybrid of the hospitalization and also the once a week thing. So it's interesting to see not only a different level of care that I haven't directly interacted with, like on a day to day, like my 9 to 5. But it also is interesting as this movie is kind of like a unfortunate time capsule of
Yep.
how things like were in the 70s and maybe even like earlier. Well, obviously, the earlier you go back, like the movie Amadeus comes to mind in terms of like you wouldn't even call that a hospital. I don't even know what you would call that, but just kind of like
Yeah.
yeah, just like that incredibly like unfortunate setting. Yeah, it's pretty not the greatest, but this movie's great. This movie's great. You also made me cry, Shane.
There you go.
You made me on a Sunday. You
Yep.
made me cry.
And this movie makes me want to rage and strangle Nurse Ratched. So there you go. We have some visceral reactions to this movie.
Right.
But I always like to start off with some broader topics related to the film, and this is the first film I've talked about starring Jack Nicholson on my podcast. And Jack Nicholson obviously is one of the greatest actors of all time and is such one of those kinds of personalities that kind of transcended just like, hey, he's an actor. A lot of people have probably done Jack Nicholson impressions or have seen him in all kinds of pop culture. But Matt, what are some of your favorite Jack Nicholson films or performances specifically?
Yeah, so it was interesting watching this movie because when you finally get towards maybe like the last third and you see the night shift person, and so it's
Played
October.
by Scatman Crothers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've been watching horror movies all month. And I saw The Shining. I'd seen it a bunch of times in the past, but I saw it. It's had been a while, and I was like, "Is that the head chef of the Overlook, like or
Hmm.
whatever the hell?" And then I went on Wikipedia. It's like, yeah, that's
Yes.
literally him. So that was interesting. But other performances, let's see. The Over Cuckoo's Nest. We have The Departed, which is really awesome. And then I don't know. Jack Nicholson has like a lot of like really interesting movies. He has this one movie that I think is with I think it's Helen Hunt, As Good as It Gets. I
Yes.
think he's a man with OCD.
Hmm.
I don't know. Jack Nicholson and his eyebrows, fantastic. And I've spanned many decades of film. Yeah, no, great. Probably one of the greatest not serious acting scenes in this movie, but still kind of like wow, like awesome, like that's interesting acting. The serious meaning sad. What's like really awesome was when he pretended to be watching baseball and the
Yes. It was
enthusiasm.
incredible.
Yeah, like it's kind of like you feel like a rousing in your chest, and it's kind of like, oh damn, like that's a really cool scene.
It made me almost get excited for the Dodgers, who are my least favorite baseball team, and go Yankees. World Series, which is going on right now. which is actually really interesting that we're recording this day after World Series Game 2 was last night, because that winds up becoming such a big contention in this film. But thinking about Jack Nicholson for me, I think the earliest performance that sticks out to me is Batman, 1989, as the Joker, and just being like, what kind of world do I live in where a man dressed up as a bat is stealing my press? This town needs an enema. And just all kinds of craziness as the Joker, which obviously a lot of people see specifically Heath Ledger as like the iconic Joker at this point. But like the fun, like deviously fun Joker is certainly Jack Nicholson on screen.
You ever dance with the devil in a pale moonlight?
Ever danced with the devil in the pale moonlight? Um, just the levels of craziness that he brings to that. And that's so much fun about him. Like you brought up The Departed. It was like, I have a rat in my crew.
Yeah.
You all can see it, but I indeed did the rat face that Jack Nicholson does in The Departed.
Mhm.
And it's like, are you a cop? And just that performance is so much fun too. And he's such a bastard too.
Mhm.
But you have stuff like Chinatown, which is a lot more reserved kind of Jack Nicholson, but still has that like devilishly charismatic kind of vibe to him. And which Chinatown is a fantastic film. I don't know if I'll ever get to the point where I do that one because I only do this once a month. So this is going to take a long time for me to get through a ton of my favorite films, but The Shining, obviously, it's like everything. It's just like, honey, you didn't let me finish. I don't want to hurt you. I just want to bash your brains in. And just everything is absolutely terrifying that he does. Here's Johnny.
Mhm.
And which just one of the most iconic moments in film, and that's 100% Jack Nicholson that sells that and stuff like that. And even stuff like A Few Good Men, where he's so intense and intimidating in it. And he just has such a wide range of interesting roles throughout his career. Now, I know you mentioned Amadeus, which I will be doing on this show relatively soon because I absolutely love that film. But thinking about other films that talk about mental illness and also show the system of how we quote unquote, air quotes, support mental illness, because, and a lot of times there wasn't really a whole lot of actual support for mental illness.
Mhm.
But we'll dive deep into that talking about this film. But Matt, what are some other films that you appreciate that tackle mental illness and say like the system of support around it?
Yeah. So I guess if you could see that you could kind of break that down in like a lot of different categories. There's maybe like the wacky. So, and I'll
Mhm.
think of Shutter Island and Ben Kingsley letting someone just just
Wild.
just go around like a grounds and just kind of like hallucinate as much as he wants to without any support.
Yeah, but it makes for some awesome twists, man.
Also, also that. Let me see. There's like so many like interesting ones. There's Girl Interrupted.
Mhm.
That one is that was James Mangold, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, James Mangold.
oddly. Him doing that, and then I think it was Kate and Leopold were some of his early films. And then he found his niche comfortably in the dad movie
Mm.
with Walk the Line, 310 to Yuma,
Mm.
Logan,
Mhm.
Ford v Ferrari, all that stuff. But no, Girl Interrupted is an interesting one in terms of that dynamic of young women.
Yeah, that's a painful movie to watch as well for a lot of different reasons. Yeah, there's like there's a lot. There's then there's kind of like the romantic kind of comedy, I guess,
Mhm.
where it was it's kind of funny story with Zach Galifianakis or something, right? Like that teen movie. I think so. But could you fact check that? It's kind of a funny story. I think that was like it was like a YA book that got turned into a movie. There's a lot of different kinds of movies that deal with like treatment,
Mhm.
especially like in like hospital settings. Treatment in general, I thought Split was kind of interesting, not
Yeah.
realistic, but I thought Split
Well,
was kind
I
of
had
interesting.
such high hopes for Glass too, because it was going
Mm,
to go into the setting of them
mhm.
getting support for their quote unquote delusions. But obviously, that didn't. turn out.
No,
How
that's
everybody was hoping that it would.
yeah, no, that turned into a wet toilet.
Yeah.
But or at least the second half of it did. But yeah, no, there's a lot of interesting movies out there. I think probably on the side of good therapists or as close as possible to good depictions of mental health treatment.
Hmm.
Definitely, I would say Good Will Hunting
Yep.
is fantastic. Um, let me see. What else? What else? Good therapy. I have to think of. Oh, also,
It's a kind of funny story.
yeah, that's
It's
what.
like,
Yeah, and then I guess maybe I'll put down. I don't know if there's much good treatment in it, like depicted, but another interesting movie with Russell Crowe was
A Beautiful
yeah,
Mind.
Beautiful Mind. I thought that was also like really interesting too. Also a hard movie to watch,
Yep.
which if you take mental health isn't like a laugh ride, it shouldn't be. But yeah, this movie is interesting for me for a couple reasons. Treatment wise, one, I kept thinking, why does this hospital have any therapists? It has doctors, it has nurses,
Yep.
it has like security, and that's that's it. That's literally it. Also like the group therapy aspect where number one, the like Nurse Ratched like broke confidentiality. Oh, your mother didn't tell me that about it's like question mark?
Oh,
Like, are you trying to
oh well.
trigger?
Oh, we'll get into that.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the biggest thing, obviously, we'll get into is like she's a nurse.
Hmm.
She's not a therapist. She's not a psychiatrist.
No.
Like she's not trained in these things, which is so fascinating. But before we get into One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I get some of the films that stood out to me. Awakenings, I think, is a really
Oh,
interesting
Robin
one.
Williams.
Robin Williams and Robert De Niro in it, which is based off of Oliver Sacks, if I'm not mistaken, specifically. And then I think some of the like you brought up A Beautiful Mind, which is interesting dealing with that mental illness. Well, Hunting obviously is like the therapy movie. With Robin Williams, who at that moment isn't a therapist. He hadn't been practicing in a while, and obviously he takes some liberties in terms of his approach to it, but it works for the situation and the client because like I'm such a huge fan of the show Shrinking.
Mm.
That show's amazing and
Hmm.
it's so funny, but obviously the whole entire crux of it is that Jason Segel's character is doing things well beyond the realm of what he should be doing as a therapist. And Harrison Ford's character giving him shit about it all the time.
Yeah.
But also Jason Segel making him break down his walls a little bit too. Because you have Harrison Ford's character who feels too much of it that at an arm's distance kind of therapist. Um, I literally just watched 50-50 this morning, which
Oh.
is a terrible representation of therapy because Anna Kendrick's not a good
Yeah, it's
therapist.
like, why is he cleaning out her car? Why is he in your car?
Well, at least I'll give the movie credit for that specifically, that she's like, she should never have gotten a client like him, I feel like, at that point where she's on this like learning curve kind of thing. Like, but she's not really a full blown therapist at that point. Like he's one of her first ever cases and stuff like that, and he has a lot. Like what he was going through in terms of like he could die of cancer, and he's slowly losing faith in that. But there's so many interesting films that deal with mental illness. And obviously, like mental illness is leveraged in such a horrible way for like a lot of horror and thrillers and stuff like Shutter Island specifically in that kind of way. And, you know, in terms of dealing with depression, like The Babadook is such an interesting exploration of depression.
And grief.
Yep, 100%. And there's so many great films when it comes to that, but this, this is the prototypical film about this. And what's so interesting about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and we'll get into, is how it goes beyond themes about specifically how we treat people with mental illness, but also deepens its connection because of Ken Kesey being a part of the counterculture movement. That this film isn't just about mental illness and how we support those with mental illness. It's very much the man versus like the movement of people in the 60s into the 70s that did not want like that the hippie movement, the counterculture movement and stuff like that. But I feel like a good place to start is thinking about Milos Forman. Now, he's directed two of my favorite films, this and Amadeus. Absolutely incredible filmmaker. I want to catch some of his films when he was in like Czechoslovakia before he came and started doing like English language films. And I know he did Man on the Moon, the Jim Carrey, Andy Kaufman film. But I guess, Matt, what are some of the things that stood out to you in terms of Foreman's direction that makes this film so effective?
Mm, I think, what do I think about the direction? I like, uh, hmm. You know, it's funny. I didn't really even think. I guess when I was watching the movie, I was so wrapped up in kind of like what's happening on screen and then
Mhm.
like comparing, contrasting it to kind of like my day job. But the direction, I guess it must have been kind of interesting. Like if I was a director and I had a large cast of people that I had to kind of like set up like scenes. Like I'm imagining a director probably like they like, wake up and they have to like storyboard like on a wall, right? So like we have like this group here and they have to go here and we don't want like, a bunch of cuts. So that means that we're gonna have to like practice, which means we're gonna have to get them to all like have a bunch of rapport with each other. Like that must be like really, really interesting. Also, like there's probably like I think I heard something that some of those people weren't even actor trained actors, just
Yep.
regular people.
I think some of the people in the background specifically, like not the core group, not the therapy group,
Mm.
but a lot of the others in the ward that are more serious cases were not actors.
Yeah, I
The
think they
front.
were actually like part of the hospital, and the
Yep.
hospital was an actual hospital,
Correct.
which
Yep.
is interesting. Um, I would want to see. I would want to see like more of his stuff. That would be kind of. That would be kind of interesting. Yeah, yeah. It was a great. It was a great
I
movie.
and this is a little shout out to my favorite podcast, the Cinephiles, because they really do their due diligence and research and give you so much in terms of background for the films that take a dive into. And how Milos Forman approached directing this film was so fascinating because it was months of auditions.
Gotcha.
They made therapy groups
Mhm.
and acting in these different dynamics and stuff like that because you need to make this naturalistic to make this as effective as possible and being able to get those group of men in this group feeling so natural with each other because like does this group feel like a group of actors acting?
No, it's
Not
like Friends.
at all.
Mhm.
And it's fascinating because it's such an interesting ensemble of actors and we'll get to that, but those scenes feel so effective. And then this film had like it has very 70s feel to it from like a look to it, stuff like that. And it's not particularly like I can't say like, oh my God, these dynamic shots and stuff like that. But I feel like one of the most interestingly directed sequences in the whole film is the finale in terms of like the perfect framing of like the pillow and the music that really incorporates and deepens the connection for Chief and back to his culture and stuff like that. It's something ethereal and something odd and different. But I feel like Milos Forman knows exactly where to point the camera and let his actors do so much with it.
Mhm.
And because Jack Nicholson gets to go full blown throughout this whole entire film doing his thing, and it's absolutely incredible to watch. But in terms of how do you feel like this film handled mental illness and in terms of like showing the more archaic and outdated approaches to supporting mental illness?
I think that. Okay, so if you look at this like a time capsule,
Hmm.
and then you can say, okay, this is even if it's incredibly like unfortunate, that's how like maybe certain people like approach their jobs, and maybe there was like a lot less oversight, and maybe some people should Miss Ratchet maybe definitely should have been doing more like continuing education units or whatever.
Hmm.
Where you look at it as a capsule, then it's like okay, this movie isn't, at least me now in 2024, I don't have this overwhelming feeling of this is like an irresponsible depiction, or this is going to make people that maybe should seek out therapy shy away from it or something like that. This is just like a really almost it's like one of those movies that it's obviously it's not a documentary, but it's like one step like behind being kind of like a documentary, kind of
Yeah.
like an insider story
Mhm.
of like, hey, like, these are like the conditions that are happening at this particular hospital. And also that's the conditions happening at that hospital, not every single hospital,
Yep.
obviously. Um, at least the hospital depicted in the like in the book anyway, whatever. But the medication being it almost kind of seemed like it was more about punishment and control
And
instead of
sedation.
in sedation, exactly, instead of
Mhm.
treatment, specifically the electroconvulsive therapy. Like that, like that's that being not connected to like I wouldn't understand that a treatment that is primarily meant for like very, very severe depression and hallucinations. I'm not sure why that would be used as some kind of some kind of tool to put someone in their place.
Mhm.
And that was really rough. That was one of the scenes that actually kind of like made me start to tear up, mostly just because like the close up on Jack Nicholson's like
Well, yeah,
painted
it's such
face.
a visceral
Mm,
scene to watch because it is framed right there. You see everything. You see the pain, and it's extremely well acted because that felt very authentic kind of reaction to all of that.
have you seen the movie multiple times? Him kind of like joking around with Chief, and he just realized something amazing that Chief actually can talk and knows what's going on. He's like giving thumbs ups, and he's making jokes with the nurse, and he's like spitting out his gum, and like you know what he's about to experience, and that is a rough thing to know before the character in the movie knows that you're about to go through something like incredibly painful.
Well, and this is really important too, and we'll get to that when we talk about McMurphy, is is this man experiencing mental illness? And
Mm.
and like that's a if he's not, that is a rude awakening to be given. And you can tell from the scene after that scene how completely different his approach to everything is because it got real quick, very quickly. And I feel like what's so fascinating about this film is like my wife is a board certified behavior analyst. Behavior modification was such a key piece in the history of psychology. And it was like what it was like the thing that existed before ABA. And there's still people like my wife's very frustrated that will use shock therapy still. And it's just like, why are you shocking people? Like that feels so like medieval kind of approach to be like it's crazy because I remember speaking of another film that dealt with mental illness or perceived mental illness is like this is a weird comparison, but Return to Oz,
Hmm.
the long like decades later sequel to the Wizard of Oz that was made in the 80s that is super dark. They take Dorothy to get shock treatment to get rid of Oz because they like Auntie M thinks it's a delusion. And like they're gonna shock therapy this kid. And like Judy Garland looks like an adult, but she's supposed to be like 12 or something like that. And Dorothy's like actually age appropriate in this one. So like they're gonna shock this little girl.
And the actual shock there is supposed to be like the kind of treatment that is only like done after everything else has failed.
Yeah.
Like every single time the any of these psychiatrists in this movie said, "Okay, so we're gonna evaluate you and we're gonna
Yeah.
see what's going on," and I'm like, "So what exactly are you guys doing? You're just letting him run amok, and then you're
Yeah.
pissed off that he runs amok.
Well,
You didn't do any treatment yet. What do you mean?"
and that's interesting line that this film draws between like actual representation of mental health treatment and the counterculture themes of it too. Because obviously the electroshock therapy is an extremely oppressive way of trying to push down a rebellion. And that's a very clear in that sequence. It's like that's there to treat him. That's there to punish him. And that's where this film is so interesting because it is exploring the mental health aspect of it, but also like this man, whether he has mental illness or not, is a rebellious spirit lashing out against a freaking fascist, Nurse Ratched, who is all about control. And it's such a, I always find those kind of dynamics in stories so interesting because I know for me, the most extreme version of myself would be absolute control. And that's a terrifying thing to think about. Like, I am very control minded for myself. It's one of the main reasons why I don't drink, I don't do any kind of drugs. I don't feel comfortable giving up my control to anything. And that can go to crazy extremes. And that kind of dichotomy is so interesting in so many stories because it's the basis of Batman and the Joker. Obviously, the Joker is a whole bucket's load of mental illness thrown in, untreated mental illness,
Mm.
criminally embodied in somebody. And Batman's all about control and order.
Which is actually interesting you bring up the Joker specifically. 'Cause I was watching one of those GQ videos of people kind of like, oh, like they'll like ask this professional like interesting questions, or they'll break down like
Yeah.
characters. And then one of the videos is about the psychiatrist talking about Batman villains, and he one of the things he says is, personally or professionally, I don't really think that Joker should be in Arkham Asylum. I think he should be in prison. He knows what he's doing,
Yep.
but he like the word insane, if I remember correctly, I think the word insane is a legal term. It's not a diagnostic term.
Mhm.
And so insane just means that you have a diminished amount of responsibility for what you are doing. And therefore, it wouldn't make sense for you to be in population with other people that knew very well what they were doing and they did it anyway for a variety of reasons, or well, that's a different thing too.
Well,
But yeah, so like Joker and McMurphy, maybe they should both be sharing a cell. They should
well,
not be inside the hospital
and that's
potentially.
such, and we're getting very close to really diving into McMurphy as a character. But in terms of the whole entire idea of counterculture is embedded in this film is there's a lot of even like racial undertones
Mm.
because Chief is a representation of our perception of Native Americans and why like his culture and in the book,
You read the book?
yeah, you understand how mentally ill he is.
He's like, this is like from his perspective, the
Correct.
narrative, right?
Yep.
Like he's
And
okay.
he sees things that aren't there and stuff like that. And that's very clear. We're talking about the context of the film. I don't think Chief is mentally ill at all. I think it's much more of a coping mechanism of like he does not speak because look what white people did to Native American people. It's a perfect representation of this idea of rebellion and a stronger power fizzing out rebellion or anything in terms of their culture. I also think it's very interesting, and it could just be like a opportunities kind of thing. But what do you notice about all the like the guards and the
Mhm.
orderlies in the hospital?
So it'd been a while since I saw this movie. It'd been a while since I saw The Shining too, and then there's like a line in there, and it's like, oh, I didn't like that. Uh, but in this movie, I was like, huh, that is interesting. A majority of the, or at least the ones in the ward that we are with, are all African American. And then I saw there was one treatment team. The treatment team is when a bunch of professionals all get together and talk about talk about
Mhm.
cases. And in the treatment team depicted in this movie, there was one South Asian, I think, psychiatrist, and I was
Yep.
like, thumbs up for representation. It's not just like a group, room, bunch of like white women, white people. Also there was literally kind of like Nurse Ratched in there too, so that's cool too. Um, but then like I wish there was more. I wish there was more representation of some like black people in the movie. And it's not just
So
kind of like bumbling or kind of like these essentially Nurse Ratchets. goons, kind of.
I think it was very purposeful. I think I don't think it was meant in terms of from what I get gather from watching the film. I think it's very purposeful that you have a group of black men in that position specifically, and I think it goes along with the ideas of control. Because the thing is, it's like, how much control do you think most of those men had in their lives at that point?
Yeah.
And in this role, they have some semblance of control. And to be honest, they get pretty violent. And because like they're the ones who are supposed to like put people down when stuff is happening. And I think it's a very interesting perspective of like this might be the only semblance of control that they might have in their lives. And I think that says something very bad about society in terms of how it puts underrepresented groups in that kind of situation.
Yeah, there's definitely like I won't get like make it like a political thing, even though it could easily like go there. But like,
Well, the thing is, it is a political thing because this whole entire story is embedded in the hippie movement and
mhm.
counterculture against rising fascist, alt-right, conservative environment.
Yeah, and when you are, I guess I'll just say, when you are in a marginalized group and you are accustomed to like systemic punching down,
Mhm.
there will be some people within that group that will dream not just to overcome their circumstances, but maybe even become an oppressor too. You can't really actually ever become the oppressor, but you might use like tools of the oppressor, or you might like think that, okay, so like I'm now like I'm on their team, but
Mhm.
obviously not actually really the case because there's no black people in actual position of power in the
Yeah.
hospital and also kind of like in some areas of like in real life. But it is kind of interesting in that awkward kind of like we're still here 40 years later. How old is this movie? Not 40, it's 50?
It's
40 years old?
it's 49 years old.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Which and I think that's the eye-opening thing. And I know, like I mentioned, my wife's a BCBA and working in like the company she works in, a lot of the marginalized groups that have roles in that organization are the ones who work like directly with they're not the ones in any authority position, but dealing with these are the kind of jobs that you can get. And they are getting beat up and having to deal with the behaviors of a bunch of kids who have autism and many of them not being able to control themselves and stuff like that. And I think it's an interesting layer there. And then you have somebody like McMurphy who is not a good person, first off. And I think that's the most important thing to point out because no matter how charismatic and likable Jack Nicholson is in this, you realize how perverse he is from the moment you find out why he's there.
Yeah, there's okay, so there's a term sometimes all right, asocial and antisocial. People usually don't really think of the word antisocial, asocial, which actually means I don't want to be around people, and
Yes.
it's more than just I'm introverted.
Yes.
It's like kind of like a social withdrawal kind of thing, but antisocial, that's more about I I go against or I'm exhibiting behavior that goes against societal norms.
Yep.
And if those behaviors and a couple of other things are like more pervasive and depending on a couple of other like factors, that could even then be like diagnostic criteria for antisocial personality disorder. I don't know. I'd have to think about if he would classify as that,
Well,
but he is definitely like an antisocial person. He is a rapist. He
oh,
does assault people.
he's a pederast
Yeah.
because when you finally find out that like this is like what a 15-year-old
Yeah, and he's like making jokes about it.
about her,
Yeah.
yeah.
He's like I fight too much and like I screw too much. And it's like, wait, but you don't understand that that's like a really bad thing. Like, there's no remorse,
Yep.
which is actually a criteria of like certain bad stuff. So I don't know. That's interesting.
Well,
Yeah.
because the thing is, it's like he's a pederast. he had sex with a 15-year-old and has no remorse about it. And basically, the idea is like, well, you see it, you can't really say no to it. And that's like, yeah, you can. That's called self-control. And he is a criminal type person. Like he obviously doesn't have a respect for the law. And he very specifically is a representation of a lack of respect for the order of things. And that's what's so important because what he represents is so much more important than who he is as a person.
I feel like people could kind of probably watch this movie and then get like the wrong takeaway, like, oh, he's the hero. Kind of when people
No,
watch like Rick and Morty, like, oh, so like Rick is the hero. It's like, no, 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 no,
no,
no.
no, no.
Like this is a bad person. This is a bad person within a bad system. But those things don't like cancel each other out. Those
Right.
things are happening simultaneously.
Which he stands up and breaks the system the
Mm,
best he can,
okay.
which is an oppressive system, but he's also a piece of shit.
No.
So, like, he's a very charismatic and fun and interesting character,
Mm,
but he's a piece of shit nonetheless. And what he does for some of them, on the surface, it's like, wow, he really found a way to get them to a place where they stand up for themselves. But also, his rash actions flicks the dominoes over. Now, there's other people who make horrible decisions too, and which is why him and Nurse Ratched are both not great people, and obviously are counter forces against each other. Because life is about balance. They're on they are chaos and order in the most extreme and honestly villainous kinds of ways in some way. Because like, does McMurphy really care? And I think that's interesting thing to think about. But at the end of the day, it's Chief who's the one who this story is really supposed to be about. And obviously, the approach that Milos Forman took in telling this story is much more from McMurphy's perspective,
mm.
much more. But at the end of the day, it's Chief who's the hero at the end, and he's the one who puts McMurphy out of his misery when he's lobotomized, because that's an appropriate way of dealing with somebody is just killing their brain and soul and making them it's like that's such a complicated thing because like what's the difference between that and killing somebody? It's a moral thing. Like, well, we didn't kill him, but you took away everything that makes him human. It just you didn't kill him because that would be wrong and that would be murder. But you did this in the fate. You basically were like, how can we kill this man and stop everything that he does without actually killing him because that would be wrong.
Especially since like the movie almost makes it again, I never read the book, but the movie makes it seem like they still have power to go, all right, we're done with this guy, we can send him back to prison. But like instead of sending him back to prison, it's like, yeah, no, he's gonna stay here.
Well, and that's the interesting part because you brought up the scene where they had all the doctors together and Nurse Ratched, because all the doctors are like, send him back.
Mhm.
The Nurse Ratched wanted to keep control.
An experiment. She experimented the whole movie, like in terms of
Yeah.
like pushing people's buttons, but especially like I feel like she liked it. She liked that.
Hmm.
She's like, oh, okay,
Which
so I'm gonna break this one.
Louise Fletcher is so good in this.
Oh yeah,
And
supporting actress, right?
yeah, she's so good in this. So evil. There's something so evil about her, and that the most diabolical thing this woman does is playing emotionally with Billy. It's just like I'm not a therapist, and like we're sitting in my office recording this, and I have my master's of accountancy hanging up on the wall. My life has been numbers and stuff like that. You're not supposed to treat people that are close to you.
Yeah, no, that's
There's
support.
there's a complete conflict of interest. She should not be treating the son of her best friend. That is messed up. And then she uses it against him. But here's the thing, she's not trained. There's no rules for her. this hospital is allowing her to do whatever the hell she wants with no training, no background in mental illness and mental health support. It's sick.
Yeah.
And how it where it winds up going, where she lobotomizes somebody and also guilts a young man into killing himself.
Also, like him even being escorted already in an elevated state, escorted into a room and then being left alone. That's also kind of like I would love to read that incident report of like, hey, so like how exactly did this happen? Like,
Well, and you know what's terrifying is in the last scene, one of the last scenes is Nurse Ratchet's just doing her same old thing with a neck brace on.
mhm.
That's the only like where's her culpability with happening with Billy?
It goes, yeah, everything goes right back to where at least the way that she thinks it belongs. It's interesting when you think of like Ratchet and like Murphy, whatever. It's almost kind of like they are maybe kind of depictions of two very different people's like worst nightmares.
Yep.
So kind of like it's counterculture, kind of like I'm going to kind of like put dynamite and into what you think is normal and familiar and the correct way of doing things, Jack Nicholson. And I will kind of like prey on your happiness and creativity and expression and like suppress you with like I don't know, like a sweet sounding kind of like I don't know, just like aggressive, just like ways of putting people in like mental vices. Nurse Ratchet. It is really interesting that both of them they're like playing chess against each other,
Yeah.
and both of them also represent. At least I'm imagining like a bunch of viewers like watch that thing, and they probably had like a weird feeling of like okay, so like, am I rooting for this person? Like, I
Well,
was a root for Nurse Ratchet
I
because
think the default setting is you root for McMurphy because it's Jack Nicholson and we like spending time with him. But then you have to confront how terrible of a person he is.
and then you have to confront yourself because like,
Mhm.
is that it's not what I want,
Well,
is
and
it?
what was the next year Taxi Driver came out? So Martin Scorsese made a whole entire career with McMurphys.
Mm,
That's the interesting thing is that so many of Scorsese's protagonists are like McMurphy, where they are charismatic. We like them. In real life, we, on some level, deep down inside, wish we could be them.
Joker.
And that's the thing. It's like McMurphy is, which this is why it's made so much sense that Jack Nicholson wound up playing the Joker, is because that's who McMurphy is in this situation. And Nurse Ratchet is Batman, the worst version of him. Because, like, things like The Dark Knight Returns, where he goes full blown fascist, oppressively controlling Gotham for protection to the point where they have to send Superman in to fight him. And there's so many, I love stories like that. Like there's a Rush conceptual album called Clockwork Angels where you have a main character who's all of us and he lives in a world run by the watchmaker who controls everything down to every single moment, obviously reflective of like specifically Italian fascism and Mussolini and stuff like that. And then his opposite is the anarchist who brings absolute chaos to the system. And Chief is us. We're stuck in this madness with everybody. And McMurphy and Ratchet are playing this chess game of who gets to control the ward.
Mm,
Because that's what McMurphy's really trying to get is control of the madhouse through madness. And this film is so fascinating because it makes us feel so good when he wins.
mhm, mhm.
And you have to think about why are you happy? Are we happy for the other patients who are out from under Ratchet's control? But also we have to think about like most of them are there because they want to be.
Yeah, control isn't, or I'll just say maybe not control, maybe order
Yep.
is definitely good thing. Maybe it's like a crucial thing, like, to the point where like when like Billy says, "Hey, I'm not ready to leave yet,"
He's not. He very obviously was not.
or when exactly, or when what was it like? Cheswick, I
Yeah,
think his name, when he was like yelling and he's like, "I'm not a little kid," but
yeah.
it's like very also great acting from
Acting like a
him.
little kid.
Yeah, very much
Sidney
so.
Lassick, who plays Cheswick, is so good.
Yeah, that was great. But it's like these ways of behaving and interact and like interpersonal dynamics, interpersonal effectiveness, they're not compatible for like the outside.
No.
They're not compatible for like success for the outside world. They need to be in a setting where they can like safely learn through mutual good treatment, individual and group therapy, like skills that like Jack Nicholson's character has either perfected or perfected in a way to kind of like manipulate people.
Yep.
And they're just not there yet.
No.
Like when he says that was like another heartbreaking moment when he says, you guys aren't crazy, or he's not as crazy as anyone else out there. Like
Mhm.
just get up and leave. And like he truly doesn't understand like the setting in which he is in. And very much so because he thought in that scene, he thought that he was gonna get out like in like a couple months, and it's like, oh wait, I can stay here for forever until they let feel like letting me go. That's also interesting.
Well, that reaction after his shock treatment and that whole entire dynamic with everybody,
Hmm.
having those realizations is fascinating. And his whole entire experience, because you see the martinis, the Danny DeVito's character, Christopher Lloyd's Tabor, and like these are not people that are ready to be out with everybody else. And like the unfortunate thing for like Billy, which also Brad Dourif is so good in this.
Also, I think isn't he the voice actor for Chucky?
He is Chucky,
Yeah.
and he's Grima Wormtongue from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
So like Brad Dourif's had a long career, and like this is such an interesting role for him because he is a kid. He's a young man who isn't learning how to process things properly, and he needs real help for that. And one, he's not getting real help from this experience, and that's the saddest thing because you brought up it's like they need to learn skills and stuff like that. They're not getting anything out of this so-called therapy, this group therapy that's going on in this film. And
Wait, why she keep poking the stick at their romantic? It's like that was the majority of what she kept talking about in these groups. They kept talking about like their romantic stuff. It's like, how is that gonna supposed to get them out of treatment? Like,
no, it's not.
like, yeah.
Well, and then you can think about the capitalistic perspective. It's like, well, if they're out, they're not making money off of them.
Mm.
They don't really dive into that a whole lot in this film, but there are like darker ulterior motives for stuff like that. But I want to find where is he? The Will Sampson, Chief,
Mm.
is so good in this film, and
He's
like
like strutting around the
yeah,
basketball court.
yeah,
That's the best. That's the
yeah.
best. Like, like I'm just tall. It's whatever. I don't care. I'm great.
He's so good, and he was in Outlaw Josie Wales. He is the chief of the tribe that Josie Wales winds up making a deal with towards the end of the film, and he has such presence. Also, he's a humongous man. First off, but his evolution throughout this film when he finally starts showing who he is, and like that final moment with McMurphy and realizing that he was lobotomized, and you see the scars and stuff like that, and him putting him out of his misery and ripping the fountain up and like smashing through the wall,
I'm gonna
and
take you with me.
yeah, and maybe in spirit he did in the end because there wasn't anything left of McMurphy. And that's the saddest thing about that is they took away everything that made him McMurphy. But that was their goal
Mhm.
because they didn't want to deal with McMurphy anymore. But there's just so many questions to be answered that you could just do stuff like that. So, like, obviously, it wasn't willy nilly because, like, he did a lot of bad stuff and caused a lot of problems. Like the whole, the thing,
That was wild. That was
wild,
absolutely wild.
wild.
I would love to see that incident report too.
They're burying all of us, Matt.
Yeah.
So many things. Like,
Oh, one last thing about Chief.
yeah,
When he talks about his father and about how like the bottle was like sucking on him, that was great writing. That was great
yeah.
acting.
Mhm.
That was great. That was great.
Well, and that's another representation of control, because that's exactly what white people did to Native Americans was getting them hooked on the bottle, getting them hooked on alcohol, making them drunks so that we can manipulate them and take what they had. And this film is important because it sheds light on the different ways that the system controls us. And in that one, the chief is not just there. Well, and it's debatable in the film if he really has mental illness or not. It's very clear in the book that he does. But there's a um this whole entire experience with him, this spiritual experience, and like talking about how Chief felt so small, and yet he's so big, and he finally felt big at the end of the film. And I just love the music, how it's playing as he runs off into the woods and stuff like that.
When he first says to McMurphy, like you're a lot bigger than me, that's the other time where I
Yeah,
started to tear up. Like, because that's very sad. I don't
yeah.
like it. Does that mean that this hospital made him feel small? Is it society that makes him
His
feel
whole life
small? Yeah,
has made him feel small.
like that's pretty
And
interesting.
I don't think McMurphy's ever felt small.
Yeah, no.
He fills up every room he walks in, whether it's, playing out a baseball game or every time he thrived. Like, he got so frustrated. Well, and that's the thing too, because he would say, "You're okay. You don't need to be in here," but then he'd get frustrated with their behavior because he doesn't care.
Mhm.
And this film is such a complex film because the two biggest characters are two of the worst human beings the whole entire film. And this is what's so fascinating about getting the right actor for a performance.
Mhm.
Because if you don't have a Jack Nicholson, because like I can't imagine like who would play that character besides him.
Mhm. Mhm.
How he's supposed to function in the story, I don't see it unless you have like a. There's just so and like thinking about like if this was act this is actually my last question, but before I get into that, were there any other things that you want to point out that you really appreciate about the film? Any scenes, any interactions?
Um, I really like it's like tiny little random things. Anytime Danny DeVito did anything in
Yeah.
a movie, I love the when McMurphy shows the playing card for the first time to Danny DeVito's character, and he's like, look, and it takes a while for you to notice that that those are porn on the
Yeah.
cards. But you're seeing kind of like you're seeing him like look at it like stare, and he gets up from the table and stop playing cards. And then you watch it again. It's like, oh, that's the reason why he's like drawn to it, and it's just funny. It's
Hmm.
he's funny. I think that Christopher Lloyd maybe should have done more horror or like scary stuff in his career. I don't know if he did, but any single time like the camera like went to him and his scary eyebrows, like
Mm.
it was interesting. Like, there was like a menacing to his face as well. And it's like, oh wow, like I don't know. So that was interesting. And then like the last thing I'll say is one thing about control, like uh, for I'm not gonna say all, but for many people that have uh, issues with control where they want a lot of it, maybe like in the present, it's probably because either in other areas of their life they feel like they are out of control, or maybe in the past they have felt like they didn't have any control. So now I have it. Now I must hold on to it. I need to maybe even like take it from away from other people. That's like maybe like an extreme kind of like whatever. Because it's not like we follow any of the staff home. Like we don't know
Yeah.
their interactions with other people or what their apartments look like. We don't know. We just know how they show up like in the hospital. So that is interesting about like nurse ratcheting and control and yeah, yeah.
It's like, does she find control in this place because she doesn't have control outside of it?
It's
Or
interesting.
is she that kind of person that, like, she would have, like, well, that's the thing. I made an assumption that she would have a husband who she has control over, but, like,
Who knows?
or maybe a wife, or nobody, because she's that kind of person. And God, I know Ryan Murphy made that whole entire show Ratchet
Oh yeah,
that
was that
tried to.
good?
It's a Ryan Murphy thing.
Because I usually
It's
I like Sarah Paulson.
Sarah Paulson was great in it, but it's a sensationalized view of things from Ryan Murphy that's big, bold, over the top, and doesn't mesh well with this.
Oh, okay, so skippable.
Oh, it feels trashy. That's what like how I would put it. And
It's
just
definitely
like,
skippable.
yeah, it feel
Trash is wild.
well, to be fair, Ryan Murphy makes a lot of like trashy entertainment, like American Horror Story, and
Mm.
like that's his vibe. Like I love Pose. Like that's something that I really, really love that he made. But like the whole entire idea of Ratchet is like I think it takes away from the true horror of who she is by making her a psycho killer.
Oh, that's what's going on.
Yeah, kind of shit. What's scary about her is she is a woman taking so much control in this situation, using it for evil.
Yeah, she runs a hospital ward like a prison dormitory,
Yeah.
and these people they didn't do anything wrong, or at least most of them didn't do
Yeah.
anything wrong, or at least that's not how it's depicted inside of the movie. It's just they're just there to receive help.
Yeah.
And why treat them? Why treat them? Why treat anyone like that? Yeah, totally.
But this film is so complex and so that's one of the things I love most about it. It's important that you love this film because what it shows in terms of mental health and counterculture, but it's also important to love this film and realize that you could be rooted for McMurphy
Yeah, definitely should not be rude.
or Ratchet. I, which either way, and then
For Martini, that's what I'm rooting for.
rooting for Martini. But I thought this would be an interesting question to pose. I would never want this to be remade. First off,
Oh yeah.
no. But if you're making this movie today, what actor would be McMurphy?
Mm. That would be interesting. Someone that has kind of uh like like a manic energy, but also can be kind of like intimidating. I can't see Jim Carrey.
Well, because
Okay,
that's a name who popped up in my head, but like, could you take it seriously enough?
yeah, because you have to do like two parts. You can't just if you're gonna play Batman, you also have to be able to play Bruce Wayne. Like you have to do like the manic energy stuff, whereas he's like screaming and pretending that he's watching baseball on TV,
Mhm.
and he also has to be the same guy that is like choking someone out. I don't know. I can't really think of anything, so I'll just give it to the kid that did the Dahmer show.
Oh, Evan Peters.
Yeah, I'll give it to him.
Interesting.
And we're talking about young people like
Well, yeah, because
today.
we have to think about because how old was Jack Nicholson in this? Like 30 something,
Yeah, man.
probably. He just looked old in everything. Because like, if I could get like late 90s Willem Dafoe,
Hmm.
I think that would be an interesting turn. And like an actor who has that kind of like manic energy, but like I don't like Joaquin Phoenix could do so many things, but I don't know if he could get like I don't because like obviously he did this whole Joker thing, but like I don't know if I could fully believe him as McMurphy or like a Jake Gyllenhaal.
There we go.
I think Jake Gyllenhaal would be interesting.
Hmm. Maybe Tom Hardy. I've never seen Tom Hardy be silly. Has he been silly?
If you like in a really disturbing way.
Was it the
Well,
movie where they were
besides Venom.
twins? Well, that. So what was the movie where he was like his own twin, like a crime
What the
thing?
hell was that called? I'm trying to
I
remember.
never saw the movie.
Legend.
Okay, I never saw the movie, but like, do you get the vibe he can kind of
I'm wondering, like, have you watched Bronson?
he's like a murderer or something?
He's the most dangerous prisoner in England, and like, Tom Hardy would be an interesting choice. He would be so much more intimidating because, like, he's a hulking presence. How he is now, But that would be an interesting choice. I think Tom Hardy would be up there. I think Jake Gyllenhaal would be an interesting choice to play. Because, like, I'm just imagining, like, Nightcrawler, Jake Gyllenhaal.
Mm.
And then, well, because that's the thing. It's just like, obviously, I have no background in, like, being able to diagnose anybody with anything, but, like, definitely see some personality disorders with McMurphy.
Oh yeah, 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 the superficial charm. Like yeah, there's like a lot of random, not random, very specific and like realistic bad stuff
Yeah.
that you can kind of like parallel to like actual real people. Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah not the greatest. Not someone that I would want to share like a Cheesecake Factory booth with.
Now we're not taking the Applebee's.
Also, Applebee's.
No,
Neither him either. Neither there either.
we'll elope with everybody else except for Murphy. We'll take them on Applebee's and see how that
I
goes.
like to hang out with the people that actually used to remember like those are huge fish. Those are huge fish.
Yeah, they caught some good fish.
Like damn.
But Matt, thank you so much for coming on and chatting movies with me.
Thank you for having me, Shane. Always.
And thank all of you for listening. So make sure to like, comment, and share on this episode. And let us know who you think would play McMurphy in a film today, or what are some of your favorite films that deal with mental illness or starring Jack Nicholson? What are some of your favorite performances? But make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. The SPDM Crew Podcasting Network has so many great shows. I'm up to like 5 or 6. It's crazy. But there's so many interesting things from movies to television to sports to music. And, even just chatting about life that we do over on the SPDM Crew Podcasting Network. We have everything, a little bit of everything for everybody. And like to thank my good buddy Joe for the awesome logo for our show here. And hey, if you're interested and you like the logo and you want to commission something, let me know. But thank you as always for tuning in and supporting the Wasteland Vintage Roadshow here on the SPDM Crew Podcasting Network.